The term simp, or a person who commits the act of simping, has attracted considerable attention over the last decade. At one time, it was solely utilized in smaller, less conspicuous social and internet circles, but in recent years it has gradually made its way into the mainstream. There's no shortage of controversy regarding this term, and the degree of controversy appears to rest with how a person interprets a simp, or simping. Similar to many unrelated terms and phenomena, there is an evident subjective component that tends to fuel misunderstandings, which in turn further exacerbates the controversy. Today's discussion will examine the philosophy, or rationale, of simping. I will begin by comparing how simping is typically defined to how I interpret the concept. Next, I will outline through personal experience and pragmatism reasons why simping should be avoided. Finally, I will discuss practical ways that you can avoid falling into this trap. To begin, I've desired to provide my thoughts on this subject for a while now, and I'm glad that I'm finally getting around to doing so. I'll avoid discussing the controversy involving the interpretation and definition of simping due to the fact that it's a conversation that'll ostensibly never end. In order to keep my video lengths reasonable, I can't discuss everything. So, while I won't address this concern directly, it'll evidently be an underlying theme lurking in the background. Anyway, how is the term simp usually defined? Well, simp's original usage dates as far back as 1903 and is defined by the Merriam-Webster dictionary as, quote, a foolish or stupid person, simpleton, end quote. While the contemporary interpretation certainly possesses this implication, it generally has a markedly specific interpretation and application. Dictionary.com remarks that simp is, quote, a slang insult for men who are seen as too attentive and submissive to women, especially out of a failed hope of winning some entitled sexual attention or activity from them. Translation: the word simp is meant to troll young men for doing anything for a girl to get some action he supposedly deserves. End quote. Comparing the two definitions side by side, we evidently see that the modern interpretation is an ostensible evolution of the earlier definition. A simp, in today's jargon, still indicates that someone is foolish, but its application has become more narrowly defined. Nevertheless, its application can still be rather extensive depending on who you ask. I'm sure you've heard and read about the term at some point, if you haven't experienced the phenomena yourself. The obvious extreme of the modern interpretation, which has unsurprisingly been pointed out by others, is that any positive behavior towards a member of the opposite sex would be considered simping. Examples like providing compliments where appropriate, treating them with respect, or even possessing romantic inclinations would be subsumed under the modern interpretation's umbrella. For my interpretation of the term, I must admit that I concur with some elements. I agree that simping tends to be pursuing a love interest and performing specific actions for them with the ulterior motive of hoping to receive sexual gratification in return. Essentially, simping is being so attracted to someone that you'll do whatever is necessary to secure more attention, more dates, a possible relationship, and/or sexual encounters from them. This is akin to being a sap or a hopeless romantic, but it's usually interpreted as more extreme. While I agree with some elements, I also disagree with many other elements of the modern perception. For example, I don't consider treating someone with respect, providing compliments or praise when appropriate, and performing sufficient actions to maintain a relationship as simping, like others do. Nor do I believe that this phenomenon is solely confined to men. Men or women can fall into the trap of simping for someone. Ultimately, in order to adequately maintain relationships, romantic or otherwise, there's a necessity for reciprocity or reciprocal action and commitment by both parties. If one is significantly lacking in this area, then the relationship will inevitably fall apart. Being reciprocal means performing actions that maintain the relationship, even though they might not be reciprocated immediately or to the exact same degree all the time. It also means not expecting a reward for your actions at every moment, no matter how significant or insignificant those actions are. Obvious examples are doing chores around the house or paying the bills if you live together with your significant other, paying for groceries and other essentials, or paying for dinner when you go out to a restaurant, are other examples. It's a different story if those actions are all one-sided, but when they're more or less equal, they're critical to maintain a healthy relationship. The point is that keeping score and expecting the score to be even all the time is an unrealistic and detrimental expectation. So too is the expectation that your efforts must be rewarded for every ostensibly nice or kind action that you perform for others. Fundamentally, I don't interpret simping as possessing feelings for someone, or wishing to go out on dates and engaging in typical behaviors that occur during a natural courtship process. Rome wasn't built in a day, and the same is true for relationships of any kind. To not only build robust relationships, but to maintain them for long periods of time, it takes considerable effort by both parties, and this means that there will be give and take, or compromise. Something that people who excessively utilize the terms simp and simping inevitably fail to consider or ignore outright. The element of providing excessive attention to or becoming fanatically obsessed with someone, though, is something I perceive simping to contain. However, it's not just limited to liking someone romantically, because it can be applied in platonic contexts as well. For example, doing favors for someone at work or showering them with constant praise and attention in the hope that you'll get promoted could also be interpreted as simping. Another manner this could occur is by treating a public figure's words and actions as gospel. Phrased differently, idolizing this person to the point where you elevate their positive traits while simultaneously downplaying or ignoring their negative traits. As we can see, simping is inherently a form of idolatry that can become extremely fanatical if left unchecked. Switching to personal experience, I must admit that for a time I was simping for someone as well. A few years ago, I was romantically interested in this particular woman, and I recall possessing a robust desire to be in a relationship with her. This strong desire evidently led me to spend as much time with her as possible, give her much more attention than what was appropriate, and most of all, it led to the deterioration of my self-worth. I've mentioned this story before, and so I'll only rehash the important details for brevity's sake. At the time, I was extremely depressed due to family financial difficulties and personal health issues. My depression about these two topics made it difficult to focus on my university studies, and my grades evidently slumped a bit. This only further exacerbated my negative mental state, and focusing on this woman seemed to be the only positive thing at the time. Perhaps that was why I focused my attention on her to the extent that I did, because it seemed like nothing else in my life at the time was proceeding well. The erosion of my self-respect and self-worth arose because this pursuit was evidently one-sided. I wanted something more to happen between us, but she only saw me as a friend. Even though I knew that fact for a while, I refused to fully acknowledge and accept it. So, I kept hanging out with her, kept providing attention to her, and I kept letting her essentially walk all over me at times out of some vain attempt to get with her. Eventually, I was awoken from my trance and the blinders came off. From that point on, I walked away and I've never looked back. Although that episode in my life was brief, less than half a year, the emotional anguish in addition to the chronic physical pain I experienced during that time made it feel like an eternity of hell. My health issues, family financial difficulties, and academic problems were bad enough, but simping for this woman was the straw that broke the camel's back. It made a bad situation worse, and I regret that I didn't snap out of it sooner. I ultimately learned that no matter what happens to you in life, at the end of the day you're the only one that will be left. You'll have to take care of yourself when everyone else leaves or retires for the night. Knowing this fact, you can't elevate another person so high in your mind that you'll allow them to step all over you. Even if it's someone you care about, the same principle still applies. Before you can respect others, you must, first and foremost, respect yourself. This means being firm in your convictions, not saying yes all the time, and not following along with others because it's easier. You must avoid simping for another person because it'll lead to your downfall. It's detrimental, and there's no benefit of pursuing someone else so fanatically, even if you think that you'll acquire something positive in return. Simping is what happens when your mind has been hijacked by an illusion, when you project your fantasy onto reality. What's happening in your mind and how you wish things to be isn't reflected in the real world, no matter how much you want it to be. Therefore, you must avoid this outcome by using your rationality to break out of the emotional delusion. This isn't to say that you should reject all desire, but rather that you should temper your desires and use your rationality to pursue them in a pragmatic manner. Forgoing rationality and acting purely on emotion is what facilitates simping. This leads me to the final section, where I'll discuss practical methods to avoid falling into the trap of simping for another person. As mentioned earlier when I relayed my personal experience, An underlying theme is that simping typically occurs when nothing else is going for you in your life, or when you perceive that to be the case. In my situation, it occurred when I was immensely depressed, and although I had other things going for me, I failed to see those aspects due to my flawed mentality. Regardless of your mental state, you need to have goals, interests, and hobbies to guide your way. Possessing a strong internal purpose along with related interests and hobbies to reflect that purpose is a surefire way to avoid falling into the trap of simping. I'm not saying that you automatically have to go out and engage in the grind set, but you inevitably will have to grind away at something to keep you occupied. This could be attempting to learn a craft, like carpentry, or learning to play the guitar and not just becoming good, but becoming great at it. Consistently hitting the gym isn't a bad option either if you wish to build self-confidence and also have tangible goals to work towards. No matter what purpose you have in the activities that accompany it, the point is that you need to find something that inspires and provides you with significant internal satisfaction so you don't have to seek it out in another person, at least not entirely. If you have some endeavor that you can continually pursue and it provides great fulfillment, then you won't need to seek it elsewhere. Does this mean that you have to choose one or the other? Your goals versus being in a relationship with someone? No, you can do both if that's your objective. You can maintain a healthy relationship with someone else while still maintaining a commitment to your individual goals. There will be some sacrifice, give and take, and a realization that you can't do everything, but it can be done if there's a conscious willingness to do so. People and circumstances may not last forever, but you can be reassured by the fact that you'll be fine no matter what happens. You'll have something to work towards as long as you don't lose sight of that fact along the way. If you do though, it's not the end of the world, but it might take some time to realize that fact again, like I had to during my own personal struggles. Finally, if there's any person whom you should simp for, that would be yourself, but even then this should also be avoided. What you should actually do is learn to respect yourself by knowing your worth and learning to walk away when necessary. Walking away can be undoubtedly difficult and painful, but it could also be the best decision that you will ever make. One that leads to circumstances you never thought were possible beforehand.